Hi, this is Alex, and if you love music, well, you've come to the right place because we're all about albums. There is so much great new music out there now. More and more music is being released as we go later in the year to get ready for the holidays, and I couldn't be happier. And you know what? I'm enjoying a lot of this new music. Well, new music to me, that is. Not all of the albums I'm listening to currently are brand new. Some of them are a few years old, some are even older than that, but they're new to me. And I would like to give you my perspective on what I think is some of the great new releases and some older ones that sort of slipped through the cracks for me. Some of you out there may say, well, why do you review albums and you're all going to give them great reviews? Why don't you tell us what you really think about the albums? Well, I've weeded out albums I don't like. Why should I waste your time on this video if I'm going to tell you, hey, listen to this album, I'll give you a 3-5 minute rundown on it, and then tell you, you know what, don't bother, I don't like this one at all. Well, rather I have filtered this for you, and I have picked albums that I think are quite good, and many of which are quite excellent. The other reason I don't tell you about albums I don't like is you may like that album. Why should I tell you what your taste is? You should go out there and listen to all albums on your own and make your own decisions. What I'm trying to do is whittle it down and hopefully give you a list that you will truly enjoy. And finally, I don't expect all of you to agree with my choices or even like too many of them, but if I can give you one or even two albums out there that you enjoy, I think it was well worth the video. After all, if we didn't like different things, then we would all own the same 100 records, wouldn't we? And it would be very boring out there. I do want to come clean though, although I have listened to all these albums I've listened to via streaming services. I currently do not have my stereo system with me, which limits me in listening to both CD and vinyl, but I am listening to a pretty good quality streaming device. This problem should be rectified shortly. And talking about streaming, I would like to give you an update. Most of you know that I believe in supporting artists, and although streaming isn't a great way of doing it, it is a great way to find new music for yourself. In saying that, I have picked Tidal as my streaming service. Why is that? Well, for a couple reasons. First of all, as I have told you in the past, Tidal compensates their artists better than some of the other services, including Spotify, Apple Music, and also Amazon Music. Additionally, Tidal also streams in high resolution. As many of you know, Apple just changed to that, but Spotify has yet to do that. And so that is another reason why I think Tidal is a good choice for me. And now things are even better at Tidal. So what has happened? Well, since early 2022, those of you out there with a Tidal high-res subscription, what they do is they give an extra $2 from your subscription to the artist you listen to the most that month. So you are supporting your favorite artists even more. And I think that's a wonderful thing that Tidal has done, really and truly. I hope other streaming services take that upon themselves as well. So what I'd like to do now is go over the 9 albums that I am currently listening to that I think are worth a listen. The first album I'm going to discuss is an old album, but it is new to me. And because of that, I'm going to use this also as my overlooked album for this video. So let's get started. The first album is by Fleetwood Mac, and it is entitled Future Games. This album came out in 1971, and it is on the Reprise label. This album is the band's 5th studio album, and it came out between the 1970 album Kiln House and the 1972 album Bare Trees, which is one of my favorite Fleetwood Mac records. I really enjoy all the early Fleetwood Mac albums, but somehow this one slipped through the cracks for me and I never owned it or never even listened to it or thought I have never listened to it. This is a fantastic, wonderful sounding record. This album is the first album to feature Bob Welch as the guitarist. He is taking over Jeremy Spencer, who has just left the band, and he was mostly influenced by blues, and this caused the band to move away from the blues and turn more into the folk rock musical sound. Another interesting thing about Future Games, it's the first album to have credits for Christy McVie as a full-time member of the band. She has in the past contributed to the Fleetwood Mac albums, but was never credited. The band still contained the guitarist Danny Kerwin, and he penned the opening song of the album entitled Woman of a Thousand Years, and this is what drew me to this album originally. It is a great, great song. I was hooked after the first few seconds of the song. This song has a somewhat psychedelic sound, and the remainder of the album does contain sort of folk rock sound, as was brought to them by Bob Welch. For those of you out there who love early Fleetwood Mac, especially those albums before Stevie Nicks and Lindsey Buckingham joined the band, I think you should check this album out. The next album I'm going to talk about is the debut album of Brandi Carlile, simply entitled Brandi Carlile. This album came out in 2005 and is on the Columbia label. This is one of the truly sensational debut albums. It contains very wonderful singing, strong songwriting, and very good musicianship throughout the album. This is one of those albums that I would easily give a 5-star rating to. And for those of you who love the Americana sound, the singer-songwriter, don't miss out on the debut album of Brandi Carlile. The next album I'm going to talk about is entitled Tucson, and this album is by the band Giant Sand, but on this album they call themselves Giant Sand, which I will explain in a moment. This album came out in 2012, and this album is a more folk country album by the band, which is led by Howie Gelb. This album that's on the Fire record label is called a country rock opera. The band is led by Howie Gelb, which has been one of the mainstays, who has written and sang most of the tunes for Giant Sand. However, the lineup otherwise has changed significantly from album to album, and the sound also has changed somewhat over time as well, although you can probably always hear a bit of that alt country rock sound on all their albums. For those of you who love the Americana sound, you're going to truly love this record. I know that I do. Getting back to why the band on this album is called Giant Sand, Howie Gelb had expanded the band to include a total of 12 members instead of the typical 6 members, so that's why he called this band Giant Sand. So who would like this album other than Americana fans out there? If you love Calexico, you will love this album, and you should know that a couple of the players from Calexico, the horn players, appear on albums by Giant Sand. I would say that this album mostly sounds like the latest album by Lord Huron entitled Long Lost, which some of you out there know I included on my Best of 2021 album releases. Next album up is by a group called Lily and Madeleine. This album came out in 2013 and is on a label that I love the name, the Asthmatic Kitty label. This is a singing sister duo group, the Sisters Jerkowitz, and they have a folk and a pop sound. Early on, they were more of a folk singer-songwriter style, and their more current albums have a more of a pop sound, but you can hear the folk origins of these sisters. So what I love most about this record is the wonderful blend of vocals here of the two sisters. Since they are sisters, they know each other really well, and their harmonies are fantastic. Also, I love they have a very relaxed sound and their singing sounds effortless. I truly like this album. For those of you who've never heard of Lizzy and Madeleine, I would take some time and listen to them. You can stream them. They are on the streaming services, and they have, I believe, about a half a dozen albums out now. If you like more of a pop sound, as I said, their more current albums have a little bit more of a pop feel to them. So some of you out there may be saying, boy, he's showing a lot of CDs and not as much vinyl this time. And that's true. And the reason is these are older releases. And since they are new to me, it was very hard to track down vinyl. Or if I could find the vinyl, it was extremely pricey. So I opted for the next best thing, which was CD quality sound. And I'm not going to be disappointed. And also, I saved a little cash. And that's a good thing. The next several releases I'm going to talk about all came out in 2022. The next album up is also on CD, and that is by Bryde. That's Bryde, and the album is entitled Still. Now, this was hard to find on vinyl. Now, more recently, I could find it, but at the time, it was only available on CD, and this was an import CD. She is from the UK, and her name is Sarah Howells. Her debut album came out in 2018 entitled Like an Island, and just like the title says, she talked about basically being on her own and having to deal with the world for the first time. This is the third album release for Bryde, and Sarah Howells is an indie folk artist with a modern sound. I believe that she would be enjoyed by people who like anywhere from Kathleen Edwards all the way up to, yes, Taylor Swift. So even if you're younger and love Taylor Swift, you're gonna love Bryde. I would say that this album is my best new find for 2022. Sarah has a wonderful vocal range, and she has a lilting quality to her voice. And I would say I would give this album a 5 out of 5. It gets my highest recommendation. So get out there and check out Bryde. You won't be sorry. The next album up, I believe, has been doing relatively well, and it is by Angel Olsen, also in 2022, and it is entitled Big Time. This is on the Jaguar record label, which is a pretty good label and typically has good quality sound. For those of you who don't know Angel Olsen, she is a singer-songwriter with a Americana sound to her voice. On this album, Angel's vocals are slightly different and has a melancholy sound, but don't let that scare you away. She was probably singing this way and writing songs because she lost both of her parents during the recording of this album. This album has charted extremely well. It has reached number 4 on the folk charts in the US. It is number 8 on the alternate record charts, and it is number 1 Americana album in the UK. I first heard Angel Olsen sing when I purchased her 2016 release, My Woman. Now, I enjoyed the album and found it interesting, but I did not have that album on my turntable very often, and I kind of forgot about Angel Olsen, but not anymore. This album is going to make me remember her for a long time to come. This is a very intimate album, and because of that, I feel this is a great album to listen to at night, probably on your own, after a long, hard day at work when you want to relax and unwind. So pick up this album, Big Time by Angel Olsen. Give it a listen. I don't think you're going to be unhappy that you did. Next up is an album by a new band called Planes, and it is a very recent release on the Anti record label, and this album is entitled I Walk With You A Ways. The duo is composed of Katie Crutchfield from Waxahachie and Jess Williamson. And how the two got together was that both artists enjoyed the other artist's music. And when Katie was getting ready for her next project, she wanted to do something different. Both artists were alternative type singers. And so what Katie thought, to be inspired and to come up with something new and fresh, she asked Jess to record an album with her, and I'm glad they got together. So instead of their indie sound, this album has a folk Americana sound. They wanted to give some credit to their past and their upbringing to bring you this type of relaxed country feel. These two artists tried to inspire each other and bring the best out of each other. So take a listen to this album and see what you think. Next up is the artist Lissie with her album entitled Carving Canyons, also coming out in 2022, and it's on Lion Boy Records. This album is an alternative folk rock album, and what you're going to hear is that Elizabeth has a very, very powerful singing voice, and yet she's really smart with it. She holds back. She's just about to give it all to you, and then she pulls it back. I think this is a wonderful trait. I think she didn't let the singing get away from her. It's self-contained, but you can hear she's like a ticking time bomb. She's ready to explode at any moment. This album is mainly a pop album, but it is somewhat countrified, and I think it has a great mix of the sound. I think you're truly going to love it. It is a very, very modern sound. Don't be fooled at all. This does not have an old country sound. This is truly fresh sounding. I think of all the albums I presented, this one may have the widest appeal. I think both old and young will enjoy this album. I enjoyed this album quite a bit by Lissie, and it gave me inspiration. I think I'm going to go back and check out the rest of her discography. I'll let you know what I think. The last album I'm going to talk about, and if you're keeping count, this is number 9. It is by a new artist to me anyway. I think she's had a couple albums out prior. Her name is Lizzy McAlpine. Some of you out there may know her. She's starting to get a lot of attention. This is, again, just recently released album by hers, and it's called 5 Seconds Flat. This is what I call an accidental album. So what do I mean by that? Well, I was in the shower and I asked Siri to play Lissie for me, the artist I just spoke about, and instead I got Lizzy McAlpine. But I didn't ask Siri to change it. I was very intrigued and I kept listening to the album, and I really enjoyed this album. I think Lizzy is quite talented, and she is a young 23-year-old singer-songwriter. She hails from Philadelphia, and this artist probably would appeal to the youngest fans of the albums I have talked about. I think that Taylor Swift fans would truly love this artist. I think this could be the start of a mega career for Lizzy McAlpine. So if you want to get in on the ground floor before she becomes a superstar, check her out. I think this is a great record. Now, for those of you who may not like so much of a pop sound and an album that's a little bit more singer-songwriter folk sounding, well, you should give a listen to her first album called Give Me a Minute. I like that album a little bit more than this one that I talked about, but I think you'll find both albums quite enjoyable. I think this is a really, really strong record. I can see that this girl is super talented, and I hope her the best. She may become a megastar, maybe not as big as Taylor, but I think more and more people out there will know the name Lizzy McAlpine. And now for last video's unknown album. The first unknown album is, and it was a little bit tricky because I gave you a very small portion of the photo, but it's one of the biggest albums of all time, and it is Thriller by Michael Jackson. This album came out in 1983, and this album is on the Epic label. This is Michael Jackson's first #1 album, and this album stayed #1 for 37 weeks. Now, that was not consecutive weeks, but it was still #1 for 37 weeks, and that is unheard of. This album produced 7 singles, all of which reached the top 10, which is a record. This album, by the end of 1983, sold 32 million albums, which is remarkable, and it ended up selling over 70 million albums worldwide, and this makes Thriller the best-selling record of all time. Not only was it successful commercially, this album won 8 Grammy Awards in 1984. So there's two kind of interesting trivia facts. Many of you probably know these already, but for those of you who don't, the solo guitar portion of Beat It was recorded by Eddie Van Halen. Also interesting is the cover photo itself. When the photo shoot came, Michael Jackson could not find the proper clothes to wear for the album cover shot. And he tried numerous clothing from the wardrobe and nothing appealed to him. Finally, the photographer who was shooting the album, Dick Zimmerman, Michael asked if he could wear his suit, and the photographer gave him the white suit that he was wearing, and thus came about one of the more famous album covers ever made. The next unknown album I think was a little bit easier. Many of you got this one. It is Blondie, and it's their third studio album, which was their mega hit album called Parallel Lines, coming out in 1978 on the Chrysalis record label. This album reached #1 in the UK in 1979 and reached #6 on the US charts. All of you out there, I'm sure, know this band is led by the incomparable Debbie Harry, and Blondie is a power pop new wave band, and they were sort of a post-punk band. Now the band did change their sound. Early on they were more punk sounding, but for this album they changed the producer, and because of that they changed their sound more into a pop sounding band. This album was recorded in New York City at the famous record plant. One of the things I most like about this album is many of the songs are very memorable. They stick in your head, and when you hear them on the radio, you immediately know it is Blondie with Deborah Harry singing, and there's no one like her. This album was selected as the number 140th greatest album on the Rolling Stone 500 Greatest Albums of All Time. Now, why did I pick these two albums? There is a connection, and it may not be so obvious, but it has to do with anything that may be happening now. So, what is the connection between these two albums? Well, if you look over my shoulder, it may give you a hint. There is Revolver, one of the great Beatle albums ever recorded, and it just came out on a box set, and that's the connection here. Thriller was just released by Mobile Fidelity One Step in a box set, and Blondie released a huge box set. It is amazing what they packed in that box set. So that's the connection between those two albums. If you knew that, well, congrats. And now for this video's unknown album, the first unknown album. Great, hope you got that one. The second unknown album. Great, hope you got that one as well. As always, this is Alex with All About Albums. Thanks for listening, have a great day, and remember, keep them spinning.